Brutal, heinous, vicious, gruesome, monstrous, and disturbing. These are the words I use to describe this murder investigation.
You that the people who beat, stabbed, and burned a 13-year-old girl were 15 and 16 years old. Not grown men, not career criminals, teenagers, girls who had cut off ankle monitors, dropped out of school, and been running the streets of Columbia, South Carolina for months with nobody stopping them.
Department of Juvenile Justice notified us that they had someone escape from a DJJ. Information was obtained about a car that may be involved in the escape. About 8:50 at Wilson Boulevard and Sharp Road, our deputies spotted the car and did a stop on the car. Inside the car was the escapee. She was there, but she was also in the car with her mother. It just shocks me that a mom who knows what her daughter has done, knows that she's escaped, and here she is basically trying to get her out of town. Mills here, who is the mom, was initially charged with aiding the escape of a prisoner with a capital offense. Pay attention to that two words, capital offense. That's murder. Go back to January of this year when a 13-year-old girl was found murdered in the city of Columbia, where her body was found where she had been beaten to death, stabbed, and burned. City of Columbia quickly made 2 arrests of 2 female juveniles. They were arrested and charged with murder. It was one of those who escaped on Sunday.
I first saw her as a missing person. And then when I looked a little deeper, I saw that it was a couple of missing person reports out from previous months. It kind of compelled me. 13 years old, African-American female in our community missing. It really intrigued me because that I'm the face of her mother, and that could have been my child.
The fire crews thought they were walking into an empty house. Boarded windows, no power, no signs of life on Cardamon Court, just smoke curling out from under a plywood-covered doorway on a cold January night in Columbia, South Carolina. They forced the door, knocked the flames down fast. It was a small fire, contained to one room. Routine, almost. Until someone's flashlight hit the floor. She was 13 years old, and she had been missing for 3 days. What investigators would uncover over the next 48 hours wasn't a stranger danger case, wasn't a random abduction gone wrong. The 2 people accused of killing her weren't adults. They were girls, 15 and 16 years old. Girls who had cut off their ankle monitors. Girls who had dropped out of school. Girls the victim knew. Her name was Niyah Baker, and by the time firefighters found her inside that vacant house on Cardamon Court, she had already been failed by almost every system built to protect her, by the foster care placement that moved her 50 miles from the only home she'd ever known, by an ankle monitor that came off without triggering an alarm anyone acted on in time, by a community that didn't know to look for her until it was too late. This is the story of how that happened. Not a theory, not speculation. What investigators, prosecutors, and the people who knew Niyah have confirmed, on the record, about the 3 days that ended her life, and the case that's still unfolding months later. If you've followed cases like this before, you know how rare it is for the full picture to come out. Stay with this one. It does. If this story matters to you, subscribe. There's more of Niyah's story still to come. Before any of this, before the fire and the missing persons alert and the 2 names investigators wouldn't release, Niyah Baker was just a kid from Sumter, South Carolina. She was born in Jacksonville, Florida in 2011, but Sumter was home, a small city about 50 miles east of Columbia, the kind of place where front porches still mean something, where neighbors know each other's names, where kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on. Niyah grew up in that world. By every account from the people who knew her, she was especially close to her grandmother, Bernice. That relationship mattered. It was one of the steady things in her life. She had people who loved her. She had a home. None of what happened later erases that. But when Niyah turned 13 in early 2024, something shifted. It's a detail worth sitting with, not to explain away what came next, but because it's the truth, and the truth is what this story owes her. Whatever she was carrying at 13, whatever she couldn't say out loud, it started showing up in how she moved through the world. That's where her story starts to intersect with a system that was supposed to catch her, and didn't, not in time. In July 2024, just months after her 13th birthday, Niyah left her grandmother's house at 2 in the morning without telling anyone. Her family called Sumter police. She was reported missing. Hours later, she came home safe. It should have been a one-time thing. It wasn't. About a month after that, she missed her 6:30 curfew. Nobody could reach her. Police put the word out again. She turned up the next day, unharmed. But the pattern was forming, and nobody yet knew how to stop it. Here's what we don't know, and what nobody should pretend to know. What Niyah was running from or running toward. Those are questions that may never fully have an answer, and this story isn't going to invent one. What we do know is what happened next. Sometime after those incidents, Niyah was placed into foster care through the South Carolina Department of Social Services. She was moved out of Sumter, away from her grandmother, away from her friends, away from the one town that had ever felt like hers, and relocated to Hopkins, a quiet suburb just outside Columbia. New foster family, new school, an entire new life, whether she wanted it or not. The running didn't stop. On Sunday, January 12, 2025, Niyah's foster family called the Richland County Sheriff's Department. She was gone again. Deputies moved fast. By the next morning, they had a lead. She'd been spotted in the Green Lake community off Old Leesburg Road in Hopkins. But by the time they got there, she was gone again. Someone on the ground told investigators she'd left sometime between midnight and 6 a.m., possibly heading toward the Faro Road and Beltline Boulevard area of Columbia. Not exactly the kind of stretch a 13-year-old should be walking alone, day or night. Investigators also learned Niyah had recently gotten a cell phone her foster family didn't know about. Nobody could say yet who she'd been talking to, or whether it had anything to do with why she kept running. But it was flagged. Nothing was being ruled out. The sheriff's department issued a public alert. Her photo went out. They told the community they believed she was in danger, and asked for anyone with information to call in. While all of that was unfolding, something else was happening across Columbia that nobody had connected yet. That same day, January 12th, a Columbia mother reported her own daughter missing, 16 years old. This wasn't a first-time runaway. This girl had a record: disorderly conduct, malicious injury, throwing bodily fluids at another person. She was in the custody of the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice, required to wear an ankle monitor. That Sunday, she cut it off and disappeared. DJJ issued a pickup order. She was, officially, wanted. There was a second girl, too, 15 years old, also from Columbia, also a known runaway, who had dropped out of high school just weeks earlier, in December. Both girls had histories with law enforcement. Both were now somewhere out on the streets of Columbia, off the radar of every system meant to track them. If you're new here, this channel covers cases like this one. Verified, no speculation, no filler. Hit subscribe so you don't miss where this one goes. And here's the detail that turns this from a tragedy into a case that demands answers. Columbia police later confirmed that Niyah knew both of these girls. They weren't strangers to her. They were known to each other. 3 days passed with Niyah still missing. Then, on the night of Wednesday, January 15th, a 911 call came in reporting a structure fire in the Capitol Heights neighborhood, just off Faro Road. The same general area investigators believed Niyah might have been heading toward days earlier. Firefighters from Columbia Richland Fire responded to 114 Cardamon Court. They found a boarded-up, vacant house with smoke pushing out through the windows. They forced their way in and got the fire under control quickly. It was small, hadn't consumed the structure. Then they looked down. There was a body on the floor, a young girl. It would take investigators time to confirm what the community already feared. This was Niyah Baker. Identifying Niyah wasn't simple. The fire, the conditions inside the house, and the time she'd already been missing all complicated the process. It took the Richland County Coroner's Office time, and ultimately DNA confirmation, before investigators could say with certainty who they'd found. Once they could, Columbia Police Chief Skip Holbrook addressed the case publicly. He didn't soften what investigators believed had happened to her. In one of the more direct moments of the press conference, he called the circumstances of her death brutal, heinous, vicious, gruesome, monstrous, and disturbing. Those aren't words police chiefs use loosely, and the fact that he did tells you something about what investigators found inside that house on Cardamon Court. The Richland County Coroner's Office confirmed the cause of death involved both blunt force trauma and sharp force injuries, consistent with the beaten and stabbed language that would come to define how this case was reported. Investigators also determined the fire had been set after the fact, not the cause of death itself, but an attempt to conceal what had happened inside that house. Fifth Circuit Solicitor Byron Gibson confirmed that charges were being pursued against the two teenage girls in connection with Niyah's death. Because both suspects are minors, much of what happens next in their cases falls under the protections of the juvenile justice system. Closed hearings, sealed records, and, in most circumstances, no public release of their names. That's not an oversight in this story. It's the law, and it's part of why so much of what happened inside that house may never be fully public. Once Niyah's death became public, the response in Columbia went beyond grief. It became a reckoning with a system that had, by any honest account, failed her more than once. Columbia City Manager Teresa Wilson addressed the community directly, acknowledging the pain a case like this causes across the city, not just for people who knew Niyah personally, but for anyone raising kids in Columbia and wondering how something like this could happen. Councilman Edward McDowell Jr. and Mayor Daniel Rickenman both spoke publicly about the case, and the conversation quickly widened beyond Niyah's death alone, to the vacant house on Cardamon Court that had sat unmonitored long enough to become a crime scene, to an ankle monitor that came off without triggering an intervention in time, to a foster care system that had moved a 13-year-old 50 miles from every person and place she knew. None of those systems caused her death directly, but every one of them was a chance to change what happened, and every one of them missed it. This is exactly the kind of case that gets buried in a local news cycle and forgotten. If you want more cases like Niyah's covered properly, subscribe. It's the only way channels like this keep doing this work. A vigil was held for Niyah in the community. People who never met her showed up anyway, because that's often what a case like this does to a city. It stops being just her family's tragedy and becomes something the whole community carries. How does a 13-year-old end up 50 miles from home in a system meant to protect her and still end up missing for 3 days before anyone finds her? How does an ankle monitor come off without triggering the kind of response that finds a teenager before it's too late? How do two girls with existing records, one just weeks removed from cutting off her own monitor, end up connected to Niyah in the final days of her life? And maybe the hardest question of all, how many other kids, right now, are moving through this same system, unmonitored, unheard, one missed call away from becoming the next case? Those questions don't have clean answers. Some of them may never get one. But what happened next in this case would add a whole new layer to it, one that had nothing to do with the murder itself. Months after Niyah's death, this case took another turn nobody saw coming. Savannah Mills, 39, the mother of one of the accused girls, was arrested after authorities say she helped her daughter escape from the DJJ detention complex in Columbia. Investigators say Mills was involved in the escape, and she was later taken into custody near the intersection of Wilson Boulevard and Sharp Road. She was booked into the Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center to face her own charges. It was a reminder that this case never fully closed, that even inside a system meant to hold people accountable, gaps kept appearing. As of now, both girls remain in the juvenile justice system, and the case against them continues to move through the courts. Under South Carolina law, exactly how and whether either of them is ultimately tried and what becomes public from those proceedings is still an open question. What isn't in question is who Niyah Baker was before any of this. A girl from Sumter who loved her grandmother, who grew up on a street where people still sat out on porches in the evening, who deserved every system that was supposed to protect her to actually do its job. In the aftermath, twin brothers Davon and Tavon Woods, who run the nonprofit Foster Kids Matter, have continued advocacy work in Columbia connected to foster youth safety, using cases like this one to push for changes in how the system tracks and protects kids who are already at risk. Niyah Baker was 13 years old. She should still be here. Rest easy, Niyah.